Hello, product people. Welcome to the Product for Product podcast, hosted by Matt Green, data advocate and product manager, and Masha Mikanovsky, product leader and author. Our goal is to serve the product community by helping you find products that can help make your work in product management easier. Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Product for Product podcast.
Welcome back. In today's episode, Masha and I are excited to speak with Alex Wilson, design system lead and speaker, about his work with design systems and why they are important for product professionals to know about. Let's dive in. How you doing, Alex?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate you letting me join the podcast, and I'm excited to dive into some design system talk. Yeah, really
Awesome.
excited.
It's a pleasure. How you doing, Masha?
I am good. Hey, Matt. Hey, Alex. Welcome to the show. And I was just thinking about it that you're probably one of the first people that I'm meeting in person before I meet them online.
How about that?
Well, I should say in the last few years, because
it's rare these days.
Yeah, it's so rare that I'm like, oh yes, I actually met Alex. First time I met it was in person.
Yes,
and
right.
It was such a different experience.
Yeah, we met. We were both speaking at recent conference, and so that's how we met. And
yeah. And when I saw your speech in the first day, I think it was, I was so impressed about. Here I'm seeing someone that actually was successful in putting together a design system. Because I had a bit of experience in a previous company where I worked. When we wanted to do a design system, we knew we need it. We didn't really have the resources for it. We went and we tried to talk with a few agencies to outsource it. We also saw over there that it's not that simple and it could be very expensive to build.
Yep.
So when you mention the size of the organization where you are, in a minute, I will let you talk and tell us everything about it. But you see how excited I am. So I was really impressed. So tell us, first of all, who is Alex and what are you doing?
Yeah, sure thing. So I actually started my career as a backend developer and found love for front-end development through the side projects that I was working on. And I didn't really get to apply that skill set until I started working in the healthcare technology industry. And there I worked on a front-end app that had heavy use of forms, and I saw opportunities for increased efficiency through a UI kit where we could centralize a lot of the form components that we were building for use across the different development teams. And at the time, I was working with a great designer who wanted to build a style guide to support the UI kit that I was working on. And the collaboration was awesome. We were in sync. We were able to work on the component patterns together. And one could say that it was a bit of an informal design system. It was fit for the app that we were working on and not really for the brand. And it was also limited in scope, but it had a lot of the design guidelines and the component implementation that you might see in a part of a design system. I eventually moved out of the healthcare industry and into finance when I started working at Rowe Price. And there I ended up working on yet another UI kit. And that worked well for a while. The UI kit was a great success, but we realized over time that the firm was a lot more siloed than we had thought, and more UI kits were appearing in other departments. And there were visual inconsistencies between them because the designers weren't really working together and were more focused on the apps that they were building and using brand colors to design those apps. This opened up a great opportunity for a formal design system where we could consolidate all of those UI kits into one place and bring the designers together to think in a more systematic way. And after a lot of hard work, marketing, proposals for funding, and a lot more of people problems and getting things together, we got the design system off the ground, and it helped break down those silos, which is really cool to see. And over time, I became the design system engineering lead, taking on engineering management as well as technical leadership responsibilities. And that's what I do today, and I really love it.
Awesome. And you know, our audience are mostly product people. We are product people, Matt and I. And as we grow in this product, we're kind of expanding our reach into areas that are not always touched by product people. But I felt when I saw that and when I invited you to the show, is that it is a very important part of how we work with the engineers. and it is really an internal tool versus an internal tool. So an internal product that, especially if you have many products or many engineering teams working on it, it's an important internal product to have. So the product people should know about it and should know what it is. You touched a bit about how does it start. When you talk with people, it's first start with the UI kit, and then it evolved to other things. So I know that let's maybe explain that a bit more. What does design system usually include? Because I know some people might think the design system is the UI kit, or it's like all the different colors and font sizes and spacing and these things that a UI designer might put in order for us to build the front end. But the design system is way more than that. So if you can explain in layman words that all of us product managers will understand, what does it mean?
Yeah, I mean, so it's a strategic asset that you can think about from any type of role that you have at an organization, because it's an asset that essentially provides the building blocks for a website and a design framework around how those building blocks should be formed, but then also how they can work together. So when we think about design systems, you need buy-in from all these different groups, and you also need to coordinate with the different groups. You need to understand the product owner perspective, make sure that what you're building is a part of the design system, whether that's from the design lens or from the tech lens, can work for all of the different teams within that organization, whether that be considering tech stack or design applications or the way that the design thinking is formed. It's really key to get all of the players in to build this one asset that you can continue to use for the life of the company. And one important thing to mention is that design system shouldn't be considered a project. I would actually consider it a program, a long-term investment.
Or in better words, a product.
In better words, a product. Exactly. Exactly. I think actually a lot of companies where they fail is that they think of it like a project, and they actually fund it for a period of time. They say, well, it looks good, yeah, it works. But then what happens when your company evolves? What if you want to do a rebrand? Then where are the resources for that kind of thing?
Right.
What if you want to invest in different areas of your business? Now you need new components. Now you might need to change things up a bit so that way it works better with those products. So it really does require everyone's involvement, as well as potentially, depending on your organization, a cultural shift towards more of a sharing model and a sharing mindset. And that's something that we definitely saw at Rowe Price, and it's really working out for us, because that's we were in a place where we were a little bit more siloed, and now it's much more in that sharing space.
That's cool. I can see why product people would be interested in this, because it sounds like if you do have a design system in place, like the time to value for delivering products and features to customers is like amplified, because it limits the like, hey, what buttons and colors and all these different components are we going to have to use in order to build this feature. Like all that's already a toolkit. So your dev team and designers and product managers can all already have that alignment out of the gate. So your just time to value is increased.
Exactly. And yeah, so it's definitely an efficiency enhancer.
Yeah.
And if you can get it off the ground, then it really can help prop up a lot of your company's goals. And we're definitely seeing that. But yeah, I mean, I just wanted to go back to one quick thing. When I talk about building blocks of a website, what I mean by that are kind of like the buttons, the input fields, the accordions, the drop downs, anything that you might interact with or see on a site that we're essentially all drawing boxes, right? That's what, at the end of the day, it's just a bunch of boxes located on the screen. But if we can centralize that in one location, that's where the design system comes into play, where we have the design thinking built into every single part of the site. And then if we get adoption across the board into all of the different teams, then we can see a lot of the benefits there.
Yeah. So let's paint a picture here. Maybe let's take a scenario. And the scenario is that we already have a product, and there is some, elements of design over there that have been defined. So we know this is how it should be done and stuff like that. and the product manager is working with the designer and an engineer to, ideate and discover a new feature, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that new feature, they will go through some wireframing. They will go through some, and we talked in the past here on the podcast about wireframing systems, and they will go through some high fidelity designs. They will do some user testing. And we actually just had a series about user testing as well. And then they will go into the development itself. So correct me if I'm wrong, but each one of those components in the process could actually use the design system, whether it is in the wireframes. I don't know so much about the wireframes, so correct me if I'm wrong there. But in the design of the screens through, like, a Figma will have an integration with the design system, or it will be built inside the design system. And the user testing, so you will be able to test it on whichever tool that you're using with those designs components. And then when the developers are developing it, they will already bring those components into their front end, and they don't have to reinvent again the development of those. So is that right?
Yeah, that's pretty much right. And I would say that if you think about the development role and then the design role, they're similar in that when you build we're talking about how we build the components. If you're a designer, you're building that component in something like Figma. Just use that as an example. And then the ideal state is that then you've got all your designers at the firm that are working at the product level, and they're able to pull those components into their designs. And so then when it trickles down to the developers, the technical implementation of those designs should match up with those components that have come from the design system within Figma, which makes it a lot easier when it comes to development to actually just place those things on the screen and then build everything around it. Because there's a lot of development, of course, that happens around a front end, back end services, all of that good stuff. So yeah, I would say that that's pretty close. Yeah.
Good. So I think I got it.
Yeah. Does like Figma, can Figma act as like a repository for these kind of toolkits, or is there like a specific place where you set these design systems up in that you leverage?
I would consider, well, Figma is a design tool,
mm-hmm.
and you could consider it in a design system lens, a repository of designed components that can then be used within other designs. Those designed components in Figma, I mean, there are tools that can convert that to code. From what I've seen, I mean, you've got to have a really solid generator to be able to do that considers semantic HTML, accessibility, best of CSS, all of that, before it can be like truly automated. But right now they're still a bit distinct. So you've got your kind of component repository in the design tool, and you've got your component repository in the tech side, but they really should be aligned as closely as possible. And a lot of, if we're talking tools, one of the great tools that's working to combine or connect both of those are design tokens. And design tokens are a way to convert design decisions into data points that can then be generated into some type of technical format, such as CSS variables. And then those variables can actually be used across all of the different components so that way you can tweak colors at a system level rather than going into each component and updating the values there. And if your tokens on the tech side and the design side match up, then suddenly you've got this very cohesive system where if you change a color on the design side, it can trickle down all the way through to the technical implementation. And a lot of design systems that I would say are probably a bit more advanced are definitely taking advantage of those. We're taking advantage of those at T-Row right now, but that gets a little bit into the technical side of it.
No, but that's fascinating.
No,
yeah,
no
cool.
worries. No worries. We love that. We love
technical. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. One thing that this triggered to me, something that you said there, is about, and I've noticed it a few times, that the designer would design something that will look really neat on the design system. They will test it, and everyone will say, yes, this is pretty, and that's how it should work. And then when you go and you use the actual components in the front-end development, it will not look exactly like that. It will be a bit different. And then I would always think, like, why does the designer not know what the developer is using so they can actually use the same, whatever it is that, whatever paradigm that those elements are using, so it can actually match much more perfectly than having this deep mismatch. So I think you kind of alluded to that there is no full automation these days, or maybe there is, but it's very complex to move from a design to a real front end, or to an operational front end, I would say. But do design systems can help with that problem?
And so, yeah, I mean, the generating of code, that aspect, I think there's a lot of tools that are trying to solve the problem right now. And with more and more kind of looking at automating tasks, maybe we'll see more of that in the future. But I think in this case, designers and developers need to communicate a bit more, because they both need to understand where each are coming from. So if from a developer perspective, they need to understand why the design decisions are being made and the research behind that, because there is a lot of research that goes into that, and experience, and as well as user testing. You brought that up before. But from the developer side, the designer needs to understand the technical limitations that there might be when building out a thing, a component, a composite component, however you want to frame it. But you don't have to know the nitty-gritty details to have that understanding. And I think that's where things start to fall apart. If you're totally working within your own silos, and a design is just a handoff, and here you go over to dev and the dev takes it, then you might not get that kind of parity across systems. But if you're working together throughout the entire process, and at the very end, you also have design reviews, and you're going through and making sure that each of the designs match the tech, then you'll have a really robust and accurate system.
Right. Communication's key.
Exactly. I think you touched on something very important over there, that it's really a communication issue more than anything. Cool. So what does it take to build a design system?
A lot. But it's actually, there's a lot of people problems involved in building a design system. To build a design system, you have to get something off the ground early and show some value, and then talk about it a lot, and then try to get buy-in from the ground up, as well as the senior management, because you need people on the ground who would look to adopt this, who want to contribute to it, who want to be a part of this initiative. But then you also need the dollars from senior management to actually fund the system. And if you don't have that, then you get to a place where you've got this ideal view of what it could be, but you just can't get there because you don't have enough resources or time to build it out. Actually, when we first started the design system at Tiro, we went down a route where we took a grassroots approach. We're actually able to grow. We had an internal chat where we grew this community up to 150 people across, I want to say 6 or 7 months. People were that interested that they wanted to know the latest of what was going on with this potential design system. And then they started asking, well, how can I get involved? Can I contribute? And that's the key, because when you get people contributing, when you get people excited, when you get people adopting, then it starts growing from there. And at a certain point, it gets large enough that it definitely requires funding, and you have to show that. Now, after a certain period of time, you get due to get funded, and you continue on with your work, but it doesn't end there. You have to continuously show the output of your work and be involved within the community, because if you're not, then it just feels like you're making all of these decisions for everybody else within this silo. And really, that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to gather as much knowledge as we can and apply it centrally, not try to block people out. So there's that side of design systems. And of course, with like the technical and design side, you have to come up with this systemic thinking. How do you want to think about your design system? What are you expecting from your design system? Are you expecting it to have multiple themes? Are you expecting it to have a single theme for all components, and that's all you're worried about? And how far into the future are you thinking? Because say you're looking to acquire a company, or you know that you have to support different products that look totally different, and you're okay with that, then you have to have different considerations for your design system than maybe a smaller company or a startup. So there's a lot of thinking that has to go into it. And then I guess finally, you have to come up with what the technology stack should look like. I mean, I'm coming from more of a technology side of the design system, so that's where my focus is. But what we've really put forth is a way that to build a design system with a web standards first approach, where the components that we're building are actually supported by the web themselves, not through some abstraction like a React or an Angular or some other JavaScript framework, which makes it easy for these components that we're building to be used across new technologies and legacy technologies, because they're actually supported by the web and not by some code that you pull off of some type of npm package or some type of library. And there's nothing wrong with using libraries. I'm not bashing libraries, but at the same time, you need to think about how this will impact your long-term goals. And if we know that technology changes all the time, and if you pick the wrong basket to put your eggs in, then it's gonna fall apart in a few years, or you're gonna have to look at a refactor. A lot does go into it.
And I'm thinking, if you're coming in and you're going to evangelize design systems, there also could be that pushback in terms of like you're making changes, like big changes within the product itself. Now that could be B2B, B2C, B2B, 2C, but you're making big changes. So there probably could be some obstacles in terms of adoption or resistance in terms of people that are heavy users, or, hey, are people going to resist this? Are customers going to be turned off by this? Do you see that with design systems as well?
I do, but at the same time, design systems make it easier to change things based on feedback because it is centralized. So say that you do have like kind of like a UX problem. You've introduced something that now maybe you're not getting the returns that you were expecting, right? Well, then you can then maybe try something else that's new, like a new design, maybe prototype it, test that out with users, test it again and again and again, and then bring that into the design system, make sure that you've made the right call, and then make sure that the teams are upgrading and adopting that new change. But that definitely makes that aspect easier, because let's take the design system out of the equation. The button is the easiest example, not the easiest to build or think about, because a lot goes into what makes a button a button. Yeah. But a button, if you have a button rebuilt across all of these different applications and you find that design doesn't work, then you have to go into each application and then update that corner radius or the color. Yeah, I think it actually helps in that case.
Okay.
You also mentioned adoption, and people either pushing back on adoption or asking, why do we, something like, why do we pull this change in? Well, in those cases, that's that part of that cultural change. We now have to have an agreement that we are going to use what's coming out of this system, but also contribute back into it. And so if designers actually come up with a different way of thinking about a component, then they shouldn't just be applying it at the application level. They should be submitting that to the design system, so that way the design system can actually evolve, and then everyone benefits. That is not always the case. I'm talking a lot about design systems, and I'm talking about like a lot of positives here, but it's definitely not always the case. I mean, you've got people that push back hard. You get people pushing back at the developer level, the design level, or you could even have management pushback, and that's some of the harder pushback that you have to face is if you can't get that funding, how do you move forward? Yeah. I don't want to just look at the rosy picture. I also want to bring into light the other side of the coin.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things about the cost for it is that it's not just the cost to build it, it's also then the cost to change whatever legacy systems you already have or application you already have to use it. So, and especially if there is a paradigm change in the user experience. And some of that paradigm change might also affect the backend and the APIs and all these the layers in there. So it can trickle throughout the system to rebuild the entire product, like Matt mentioned. So maybe that's maybe the fear that management might have if they did not plan on building something new, right? But sometimes they have no choice, but they do have to build something new. So that's the time to put it in there. But what I saw, you did it actually really brilliantly in the conference, in the presentation that you did about how you presented it to management and also to us with a very simple KPI, the number of teams internally that adopted it and using it, and how over time the number goes up because people do see the value in it. So I felt that was a really brilliant way to show that. Very simple, but very effective. It does work for a big company like Tiro, that you have probably lots of projects, lots of developers, lots of teams, lots of legacy systems and whatever. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I mean, data is your best friend here when it comes to design system. If you can get your design system to a point where it's data driven, down to the decision of should we build this component? Is it really honestly? It's a business within a business. If you think about the design system as a business in itself, you think about what you want to invest in. Are you going to invest in something that's used once, or would you rather take your time and invest that in something that's used 3+ times, 4+ times? And then if we're able to get data from that usage, you can then feed that back in and say, okay, what can we change now? What can make this better? And I'm not even talking about user testing. That's a whole different subject. I'm talking about developer integration, how well these designs work, and like how you design and construct them in Figma, how that trickles down to those designers that are actually using it.
Right.
Figma variables just came out. Are you making is your design system making use of those? So to kind of ease that design process for those that are getting those components from the centralized source in Figma.
Right.
Yeah.
No, these are great questions. And at the end of the day, it's probably about the investment. So how much are we willing to invest in the future? If we're already talking about that, aren't they already existing design systems out there that people can just take and adopt versus build in-house?
There definitely are. So, I actually spoke with the guy that created recently. Reshaped is a design system. It is built with React. The creator of that, he's done an excellent job with the design system. You've also got Shoelace, which is another design system built around web components and web standards. So it follows a similar pattern to what we're doing at Rowe Price. And what I've seen from those, I've not personally used an out-of-the-box design system, but I've evaluated the use of an existing design system. And where I can see it being very useful is especially with smaller companies who need to get a design system up off the ground quickly. But if you are trying to build your brand around a design system and you've got really opinionated views on how you want things to look, you may have to go with something more custom. Now, that's not to say that you can't style a pre-existing design system to look the way you want it, but you may not have that full control that you might want and flexibility with that system if you use an out-of-the-box solution.
Right.
But
right.
I think you could argue the same thing for any type of external library or product that you try to integrate.
Yeah, it's just one level above that. I think that when I did a research about design systems, I even saw a SaaS company that build a platform to create design systems. I don't remember the name of that, but if there is money into it, then someone will build it, I guess.
Oh, for sure.
Awesome. Last question I have is, from all of your experience and getting over that hurdle of building one and having it now, it's in the wild in your company, what some mistakes that you would say people should avoid when they're building a design system?
The first one would be working in a silo. If you work, I mentioned this earlier in the podcast, so I won't harp on it, but if you work in a silo, then everyone feels like you're making the decisions for them and not with them. And that's can be a barrier for adoption. Because even though, we're all people, even though we're all working for the same company and have these same goals, we all have our own, feelings and our motivations for where we want to go in our career. And if you're just telling people how to do things, then it can rub them the wrong way. So I think that's one. Also, I think that one of the things is not having enough funding for your design system. There are a lot of use cases out there where you've got people that are very passionate about building one, but they just don't have the maybe the technical support or the design support to do it. So in many of those cases, you end up with I mentioned earlier, like the style system or a UI kit rather than a design system. And when you don't have one or the other, then either your experience falls apart a little bit, or you have a lot of different technical variants because there's just not enough thinking that's going into how to build out each of the different components. The next thing is not having like a system-based thinking. If you are building out a component without thinking about the APIs that are also within your design system that you've already built out, then you could confuse your developers. You could confuse your users because you might call something a variant here and a type here, and they don't know what the difference is unless you have that explicitly written in your documentation. And if it's inconsistent across the board, it will be very hard to use. So you really need to think about how everything comes together from an architecture perspective. And I guess finally is, and maybe most importantly, is just thinking about the different users of your system. I mentioned that design systems are like an internal business. As an internal business, you have your different users. You have your technologists, the people that are going to be incorporating those components into their applications. You have your QA testers. You have your A/B testers. So people that want to modify something, ship it out, test to see if it works, and then make those like formal alterations within the design system. So you got to make it flexible enough to do those types of things for those types of people, but also rigid enough so it's easy enough for the devs to include it in their project. And then, of course, you've got your end users and potentially authors if you have a content management system. And so there's a lot to think about in terms of who you're catering for. And as you're building out each component and as you're thinking through the design of each thing that you're creating, it's the most important thing to think about the users, because at the end of the day, without the adoption, you don't have a design system that's worth building.
Yeah, like any other product.
Yeah.
I should probably stop saying this is my last question that I have, because I always have more questions.
Bring them on.
and then I'm kind of like, I just lied before about saying I don't have another question. But something you said triggered in my mind that I tried to do it also before when I was in that experience with the design system. I tell me if that's correct. I thought that it will be very useful to have almost like sample pages that are bringing all of those components together to a cohesive experience. For example, a search experience in a list. So whatever the elements are going to be, or the entities are going to be that will develop the page for that, if this is users, organizations, whatever it is, doesn't really matter. The pattern is not just about each one of the components on the page, but how they all behave together. Is that something you would usually also include in the design system? And that's the first part of the question. And the second part of the question, do I need to think also about those users? Because those users are the users of the applications we're building. And those users, to think about those users, that's really the role of the product manager, to know who the users are for their product. And sometimes it's a very big job as well. So there is a lot of unknowns over there sometimes. Who are the personas? Who are the users? How do they use it, etc. So how do you bring all of that into the design system? It feels to me like a huge undertaking.
Well, that's the problem. I mean, like so we actually faced this early within our design system, is that everyone thought that the design system just did everything. And when you get that, then people are like, "Oh, that'll just do it." That asset we created, that'll handle it all, right?
Easy button.
Yeah, easy. But actually, it's important to draw that line and scope it out, especially early on, because you'll start getting questions about things that people want you to build that really shouldn't be within a design system. And so where we drew that line at T-Rowe was, and I won't go into atomic design, but if you look up atomic design, you can kind of draw a line based on that type of thinking. But what we do is we build out kind of the foundational pieces, which are kind of like that token thinking we've been talking about, your colors, your spacing, your borders, like all typography, all of those types of things. We definitely handle that. We handle the lowest level of elements, buttons, form fields, icons, those types of things. And you go one step further, now you have composite components. So these things are like tiles or cards, where you might have, it's like a wrapper, but then you also have components within that are also from the design system. And that is where we draw the line. We do design template guidelines, but we don't actually design the app level views. We leave that up to the designers, because designers, they know that product, that part of the product the best. those application designers, and they also need to have the creative freedom to build whatever's best for that set of users. And the design system isn't meant to target that set. Instead, it's supposed to target everything as a whole. And that type of thinking requires like knowing how each of the different products might use it, but not in that specific use case how it's actually used.
Yeah.
So hopefully that answers your question.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and I'm really happy that you explained that to me, because I always had, or at least when I dealt with that, request, I had in mind that, I want the design system to create those patterns for me. Why should I build them again? But I see your point, and it makes a lot of sense. So thank you for that.
Of course.
And I don't think I have any more questions right now.
Yeah. I just had one last one, and it could be quick, but what is one piece of advice or like one starting place where a product team, just starting to look into design systems, where could they start?
I would start by investigating, or by outlining actually what you would expect from the design system, what your expectations are, so that way you can build something that everyone has agreed upon, like of what that thing will do. Kind of going back to scoping it out and drawing that line. If everyone has this mutual understanding, then I think earlier it was mentioned that if management isn't aligned with what they're expecting, then that could cause problems, and they might pull funding or something like that. Well, if everyone's aligned from the start, then when you start building it out, you'll have something that everyone's kind of agreed upon. But I would say that also I would take a look at pre-existing design systems. So one place to go look is a site called Component Gallery. I'm not sure exactly the URL, but if you look up Component Gallery, you'll find that it's a great location to find common components across different types of design systems. They've got links to those design systems, and they pull the components directly from their demos. It just documents each of those. And there are also other things like design system checklists. That guy that I was mentioning earlier, who Dimitri, who works on Reshaped, he created a site called designsystemchecklist.com, which is rightly named. Right. And that goes over kind of what you might want to get out of your first iteration of your design system, or maybe what you might want to do next if you're missing if you have a gap in there. But those are the first things that I'd look at, and then try to figure out if you have the funding to actually build it out, and try to figure out a multi-year plan. So that way you're not kind of caught with a design system halfway through and not have a plan to fund it later on. So it is a program.
Yep.
It is a product.
Right. Yeah, it's a product. There you go. Iterate on it.
It's a product.
Excellent. Yep. Well, very good.
Awesome. That was excellent. Thank you so much, Alex. Where can people reach out to you?
Yeah, so I'm on all the platforms. My handle is Code by Alex, and then I'm also on LinkedIn. And you can pretty much find me there.
Cool. Sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Alex, for coming on. Really appreciate having you on the show. Moshe, thank you as always. Thank you to all the listeners. We really appreciate it. And we'll talk to everybody next time.
Yeah,
Thank you
thanks
very much.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you to all the listeners. We really appreciate the feedback and support. Please leave us a review to help others find the show on Apple or Spotify or anywhere else you're listening to the show.